Before we do that, though, I want to tell you a little bit about some CSU Writing Project programs that are coming up that you might want to be a part of. And the first one of those happens this Saturday. You can see this wonderful swag here. These are door prizes. If you come on Saturday, April 11th, to CSU to Education 235 at, Tara, do you remember what time? 9:30?
It's 9:30. Round up.
You can join us for a Monopoly marathon, which sounds fun in and of itself. We're actually going to play several rounds of Monopoly and do a game hack of the game itself to talk about and examine what it looks like to be in inequitable systems and how we might hack those, how we might critique those, and what the implications for teaching and learning are related to that game hacking idea. And these are door prizes that we are going to give away. One is the 80th anniversary edition of Monopoly. The other one is a copy of this new book, which is really interesting. I haven't read the entire thing yet, called The Monopolist. And it tells the true history of Monopoly, which isn't what you might think. The subtitle is Obsession, Fury, and the Scandal Behind the World's Favorite Board Game. So I encourage you to come to that. You can find out about all these programs. I'm going to give a quick plug out to these other ones at our Writing Project website, csUwritingproject.net. There's information for registration for all of these things as well. On May
5th.
May 5th, we'll have our next speaker series, and it's going to be a panel. It won't be an individual speaker this time. We're going to have a panel of teachers and students who have been involved in some issues regarding academic freedom. You may have heard about the controversy surrounding the AP History curriculum at Jefferson County that occurred later or earlier in the fall. We're going to have some of those folks come and talk with us about that particular experience and what it's been like as a teacher and a student to advocate for academic freedom. Pam Cope, our favorite and most wonderful Pam Cope, will be moderating that conversation. So we encourage you to come and be part of that if you would like to do that. Information about that on the Writing Project website. And then we have a couple of upcoming summer programs. This one called Teaching the Tensions, it runs June 15th through 19th. It will be an open institute for the CSU Writing Project. Anybody is welcome to attend, grades kindergarten through university, all content areas. We're really going to look at what it's like to intentionally bring issues of race, class, gender into the classroom, how you deal with that as an educator in ways that are good for learners. We're also going to talk about what happens when controversy emerges on its own. How do you as a teacher deal with that? And what does it look like to be a teacher at this moment as an advocate in a pretty fraught system educationally? We'll have some concrete classroom strategies around that, and we're going to really integrate a lot of digital literacies in that work. So anyone is welcome to apply for that. And the last thing is our Summer Institute, which is a more intense experience that begins in the summer and continues through the school year. The dates are on that, and you can find out more information on our Writing Project website if you're interested. You can also contact me, and you can find me through that Writing Project website as well. Okay? Yes?
Thank you. Is the teaching intentions also for practicing teachers, or is it for pre-service teachers?
It is primarily for practicing teachers, but we invite pre-service teachers to be part of it at a greatly reduced registration rate. So yes, they're absolutely welcome to come. Okay. And now I want to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Elyse Eidman-Aadahl. I last week said that I had known Bud Hunt since the turn of the century, and I've probably known you at least that long. Elyse is a wonderful person who I like to think knows at least a little bit, and usually a lot of everything about everything. She has that kind of a mind, and you'll hear her in her speaking today talk about some things that she has learned and is involved with in terms of digital literacies and what it looks like to teach it at this particular moment, particularly in regard to civic engagement. But the other thing about Elyse that's really wonderful that I think is true across the board with National Writing Project is Elyse is a person who can look at a situation and a problem and give you a different angle on it that always makes you think. And that's what you're going to hear about tonight. She asked me not to give her a long introduction, so Elyse, without further ado.
That was my one request. I said, one request. I'm happy to do whatever, but no long introductions. Hi, everybody. I actually was a perfect introduction. I am a person who knows a little bit about a lot of things. That's also what you're going to see, in the best sense of that and in the worst. I'm curious a little bit about you all. How many of you are right now in a classroom? Practicing teachers. Yay. And I see faces, fabulous writing project faces, I know. Thank you. And how many of you are preparing to go into a classroom at some point? Great. And then the other category. Neither. I'm going to count school administrators, people who work in buildings. Those hands get to go up. Okay, great, thank you. Helps me a little bit. When Antero and Cindy asked me to come do this talk, this was a while back, you know, and you set a date and you come. And so it was a little bit recently that I was thinking, okay, so really, in the context of the series, what should I talk about? And I kept pitching ideas to Antero and Cindy, and I want to tell you this is what it was like. I said, well, and you have to know I have these really great, I have a bunch of great presentations, so I'm like pitching these great presentations. So like, should I do something on connected learning? And they're like, oh, well, sure. Of course, we covered that, Danielle and Nicole talked, okay, well, all right, somebody's already done that. So what about like just getting kids doing action projects and really engage with their community? Well, that'd be a nice follow-up to what other people talked about. I can see that would really reinforce. Oh, well, then it's got to be like, for me, it's got to be all about social media, media production. Fabulous. That too would continue a theme well articulated by previous speakers. And then finally, I'm thinking, okay, so like critical perspectives on curriculum or maybe on technology. Well, Bud is actually the week before you, but oh, okay, so I think that's covered. So I'm thinking all of the stuff I would normally say in these great presentations about is gone. So that's why my title's actually talk is now throwing out some ideas at CSU, April 7th, 2015. That is my presentation right now. So he's throwing out some ideas. I really did want to come and be like cool. I wanted to be the person, the teacher would come here and say, think different. Be one of the cool people who just think different. I'm giving up that because they covered all that territory and everything that all those people said are ways to do that. I am going to go for this, which is really my goal, which is to be just a cool lady. And if you know that, that is actually a Pinterest board, and there's a Tumblr blog for cool old ladies. I aspire to be there at one point in my life. I don't know why there's only 19 followers, but anyway, there is. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So I'm going to go a little old school, and I'm going to start with a math problem. Now, is there anybody who can tell me what this might be?
Minutes in a school year?
And I'm consciously vague about what the question might be. Because some of you might even be able to guess. Some of you might solve the number, and some of you might be able to guess what the equation is from certain clues. I'm just curious. Okay, I'll tell you what the answer is. This is the answer. It is a big number. Those are billions at the end. 56 billion. And then we get the millions and the hundreds of thousands. 56, 57 billion. But if you look at that, that's 180 days times 6 hours a day times 3.1 million teachers public plus 49.5 million public students equals that many hours of engaged time in the public schools in the United States. It is a big number. It costs us about that much. Those are also billions. That's a huge social investment in hours of time in K-12 public education, teachers and students together. So I want you to hold just the magnitude of that in your brain. And also think about this. This is also because I'm an old lady, so I'm going to refer to some old stuff. Ted Sizer, one of the earliest reformers, school reformers, invented the Coalition of Essential Schools, a great series of schools. Some of them are still out. in the country, still operating, wrote a series of books, a famous one, Horace's Compromise. He talks a lot about how these hours are really about dailiness. You know, when you're in school, when you're teaching, and when you're a student, there's a lot of just life that is daily. Someone's upset today, someone's tired today, we're getting through the program today. A lot of the things that I might have come to talk about, like these fabulous action projects and media projects, are superb, and they are high points often of the curriculum for kids today, and for teachers as well. Today, I want us to flip away from some of those things and think about the dailiness of school. Not the peak experiences, but the ongoing sort of everyday. In this piece, what Ted Sizer talks about, this is an editorial from Ed Researcher, what he talks about is a conversation with a principal friend of his about just a day when 10 different things are happening. A teacher is sick, a student is really upset about something that happened at home, or this or that. He's an instructional leader, but that's his life too. And part of the argument of Horace's Compromise is that a lot of school reform gets on the shoulders of the many compromises we need to make just to live together as people in schools. So dailiness. Also, this book, a 1995 book, Tinkering Towards Utopia. This is a book that takes a historic look at all the different attempts, some of them quite bold, and I would say even more bold than some of the reform going on right now, to hugely change schools, make them just be different. And so many of them take hold in a network of schools, on the edges, maybe in alternative schools, but none of them, they argue, have really penetrated the basic grammar of schooling. Like the fact that we have age-graded classrooms, like the fact that middle schools, high schools, elementary schools are predictable in their structure, that we have egg crate architecture, that one teacher is probably in a room with 25 or 30 kids, almost every one of those minutes, those many minutes in a classroom. And that the things that are different are the things that get noticed. Like if you talk about looping, oh, well, we're gonna let the first, second, and third graders stay together until they're ready. And everybody's like, oh my God, that's crazy. What is that called? Is there a research base for that? There's actually not really a research base for keeping them apart, but it's the normal practice, right? So it's the new thing that gets all this crazy attention, and no one pays attention to the general grammar of schooling. So that means that for that huge number of hours, we can about predict for these hours what's going on for the vast majority of kids in the vast majority of schools in the United States, because they are so typically the same. So I want us to just think a little bit about that interesting problem for people who care about wanting to do great things with young people. And I want to ask, for all that investment, for all those hours, for all those dollars that we invest as a nation, what are we getting out of our schools? Now, I spend a lot of time now. I was a teacher, then a professor and stuff like that. Now as an executive director, I spend a lot of time with people in the policy community. They ask me that all the time. What do you think we're getting out of this big investment in schools? And they almost always mean student achievement. They pretty much every time will say something like, we spend a huge amount on schools and I haven't seen any improvement in math scores. Reading scores are flat, as if those scores were widgets, as if we were saying, you know, the country needs more chairs. We're putting a lot of money in the chairs factory, but I don't see any increase in chair production. That's what they're talking about. I want to ask a different question here for this series, which is, what are we getting for all this investment in terms of democratic achievement? So here we are, we've invented over centuries a public school system funded with public money. It's public, it's free. We require kids to go to it, all because we have believed at certain times in our past that this will give us a better democracy. Is it? This is a question that no one asks of schools anymore. They did at one point, but not anymore. So I want us to take an example of something that's in this dailiness. It's kind of quotidian, it's of daily life, and spend some time with this lens. So sitting around are some people that I have drafted graciously into passing out some papers. You're seated around and they will jump into action. And up here you all, and you're gonna get a packet that looks like this.
This is their
Yeah, I think we're good.
So what I love when you are flipping through, I would not recommend that you read these articles in depth. I would just flip through it because we're not going to spend that kind of time with it. And then take the piece of student writing. These all come from middle and high students in 7 to 10 grades. And then read it. I'm going to collect the writing back from you, by the way, because you shouldn't take these with you for other reasons. But you can write on them if you want. Or make a T-chart. And I'd be interested in what you notice about the piece of writing, what it makes you wonder. If you want to look at other pieces of writing, the numbers will tell you, if you see a number different than yours, that's a different piece. Just take like 5 minutes. Just write and scribble on. So, just one minute.
So that's all. No, not in the top room.
In a couple more minutes, I'll just ask for folks to either say something they noticed or wondered about their writing. Or the writing they're looking at. Okay, so I'm curious, you didn't have enough time to do this. I'm not asking you to grade or respond or anything like that. So actually, first impressions are really not such a bad thing right now to hear. Would anybody just share like something you've noticed or wondered about in a piece of writing? Anything you noticed, the one that you were looking at? Yeah.
Yeah, they were asked to use evidence and they didn't use anything. They was just, I think they should do it. This is why, because I think they should do it.
Okay, keep
Like
going, yeah.
circular argument. There was no evidence to back up their argument at all.
I was wondering if they had like a direct audience they were supposed to speak to, because it wasn't clear like who this argument was posed to at all. It just said anyone should be allowed to do this.
Totally, yep.
I noticed in the one that I wrote, she only cited one of the reading pieces, giving her a very one-dimensional view.
I say keep going, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, go ahead.
I noticed a ton of voice. It was really fun to read. There, taking an organ out of one's body to put it in another is crazy, right? And what's the big deal? And so even though there were a lot of grammatical errors and technical errors, this one, the writer really came through.
And of course, these are very different papers. They are not all taken from the same PowerPoint or any of that, so they're gonna be different from each other. Keep going.
A lot of them, the two we had, they both used evidence in the text, but they didn't cite it. There was no clue where it came from, where they got.
14% of this. It's very much like a TV news show. Keep going, keep going. Wait, I think we were coming back, yes.
I was wondering if this student was a English language learner, because the language or some of the words, they sound right, but they're not the right words. So like, allowing them being donors would save hundreds of life. So it was pretty well formatted, but some of the grammar used, it kind of seemed like
Some things seem like, some of them might have seemed as if they just had grammar mistakes, and of course it's first draft writing, so not surprising. But sometimes you see something and you say, well, the pattern of that mistake makes me think that may be an English language learner. So now we're into a new round, 1, and then we'll sweep this way, yeah.
I had a couple things I was sort of wondering. One, the day before, that they were supposed to, I imagine, read and annotate the readings, right?
Yes.
Which is something that most students, pre-Common Core, I don't know how the transition is going, but that's not something that a skill that's been taught. So I wondered how much of this they actually did prior to the actual test, and also how much time was allotted for the typewriting?
They had, so I'll answer the second one just for everyone's benefit, which is that it was untimed.
Okay.
So when they did it, they had as much time as they wanted to take, though we know across many schools they did this, and some schools will allow or make provision for a truly untimed thing, and then in some schools you will get the message that you really ought to go back to class. But it was untimed, and it's entirely possible that they do this sort of work routinely, or that they've never done this sort of work when they did this, yeah. But now sweeping back here, some of the hands here, yes, and then back toward 1, 2, 3.
Oh, sorry.
Your hands, yeah.
Okay, I just was kind of thinking, I guess, about watching some of my kids take part this year and just the connections that certain students would make and thinking of equity, like really what if a kid that has a parent in prison is reading this and, yeah, I don't know, just thinking about that, I had a lot of students that, like, they would be making some strange connections to someone's prompts.
Or some different connections.
Different, or,
Yeah,
right.
right. Back in the back, sir, with the red shirt. Did you have your, oh, then that false hand goes to someone else. So someone just earned the floor. We'll do 2 more, yes.
One, I noticed that there was an obvious attempt at structure, like the structure of argument writing, and that was impressive. And the other is, I love this line. This reminds me of my days of IB reading. You just write lines and you would record them in a journal. It says, people with freedom might not want to donate because they'll feel less liberal living with one kidney.
It's so wonderful, isn't it? That's
I
fabulous.
was moved by that line and wondered.
Yeah. Okay, any one more comment since we, yes, okay.
I think looking at this from an achievement standpoint, you could get lost in the fact that there's grammatical error in this writing, but when I look at it from an argumentative standpoint, I have a better understanding that this student looked at both sides of the argument and it presented both of those in their writing. So I think at the onset, it could look like poor writing, but it's actually really well done.
If particularly you're looking for something like, did they present both sides of the argument? So an interesting thing, I'm gonna read, I passed around an alternative one at what we might call the lower end of the scale. I'm gonna read it in a second, but part of what I want us to think about is when we make these kinds of assignments and when we look at the writing, there are all kinds of things we can talk to the young people about. We can talk about the grammar, we can talk about the structure. I'll bet most of you in the room saw a 5-paragraph essay. I've read thousands of them, and the prevalence, there are 3 reasons for whatever my position is, and those 3 reasons may not relate to each other or anything else, but there will be 3. I'm gonna read this one, and maybe also we should think about this question about what if I have a family member in prison? In some communities, and we know especially in communities, hard-scrappled communities of color, that actually mass incarceration means that a lot of kids have a family member who has interacted with the prison system. So here's one who writes no. No, because the infections they might have, or they might just want an early release from jail or prison or whatever they're in. Some infections they might have, colon, lung cancer, gum infection, heart infection, or they might have STDs. Some things they might do, trick the patient, receiving the organs, trying to kill him, her, and escaping, or by doing something like that. So I ask you, would you take an organ from someone that is in prison, jail, or state prison, or something like that? Now, that's also a paper that we could look at and say, I see where I can work on some grammar. I see where I could work on some elaboration. See, the young person has gotten the colon, introduces a list, and it's used twice and correctly as a colon, and that's a high bar. We've got some confusion around the theirs. We can talk about all that stuff. I wonder who talks to this young person about what he or she said. Either the logic of it, so really, they might try to capture the person who's receiving the organ and maybe kill them and try to escape. Or why do you think it'd be terrible if they got time off for doing this act? Talk to me about that. Or there's a huge amount, and I saw a lot in these papers, of what I would think of as prisoner hating. This is not alone in the assumption of what the prison population is like. Actually, a lot of public policy is now looking at prisons and seeing in our mass incarceration, the numbers of prisoners that we have that rival like North Korea, you'll see us compared with North Korea all the time. that our automatic enforcement of low-level drug policies and things like that have actually put a huge number of nonviolent people into jail. This doesn't actually describe what the statistics are. Do we just collect this and then ever look at those statistics? Or do we grade it and return it because it was a test thing, test prompt, it wasn't really part of the curriculum? But what an incredible opportunity for conversation about what the Times would say and law would say is a real public issue. So that's part of my thinking about the question, what do we get when we invest in a public school system in terms of our democracy? So this question, there are people who have written about democracy. Some of you probably encountered these folks in poli-sci like Benjamin Barber or McPherson, and Barber's notion is strong democracy. That there's a kind of strong democracy that's really participatory, that people really roll up their sleeves and they participate in democracy. And then there's a thin democracy. His alternative for strong is thin. We don't actually really do much that's civically engaged. We might vote, and then that's like a big deal. Now and then we only pull a lever, but we expect then politicians to go ahead and do like the nation's business. Or do we believe democracy is something that we all do, that we're all participants in? McPherson, who also makes this kind of argument, says we've actually drifted, and so does Barber, that in a way we've drifted as a nation, many nations, to a kind of liberal democracy, which is about actually government should really just foster as much individual freedom as possible. There's not much communitarian stuff for us to do together. If we can just protect property rights and then sort of let everybody go on their way. And he talks about that part of the purpose of schooling becomes possessive individualism, which I think is this fabulous term. In other words, I possess skills. They're graded, they're certified. I, as an individual, own more skills than you, and now I can compete with everyone else and do better or worse because of the skills I possess. And when I heard that the first time, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what, that's what this whole credit thing is set up. We teach skills, like we can organize a paragraph, we can do this, that, or the other, we're gonna get grades, we get more credit. I possess those skills as an individual, but I'm not really much asked to think about where I am in a community. Like we wouldn't have that discussion about what would it mean to think about prisoners and prisons differently? Or why does it matter that is it a good thing to have read both points of view? Is it in fact okay to actually not know what you think? You really can't do this test and come out effectively. You would be able to be graded, you would actually be able to score a high point by arguing that you are ambiguous about this, that you don't know what you think about this. And this is how these work pieces that you read led you to think many things and you're unsure. But nobody would ever teach a student to do that. That's like on a test. No. State a claim and identify evidence, organize the evidence. Find a counterexample and rebut the other side. So you're like a little argumentation warrior in a way, learning the skills to be a better warrior, but not maybe necessarily the skills to be a practicing democratic actor in the public sphere. So thinking about this, part of what I do is I participate in this network of researchers. YPP is called Youth and Participatory Politics. So we've been trying to think about politics and political life for a while. Part of why we're doing that is we actually really do think that democracy is kind of precarious. It needs to be renewed, and right now it's not in the best shape. I don't probably even have to make much of this case because the country seems to agree. 65% of people now express dissatisfaction with government, name it the #1 problem. A recent poll of about 2 weeks ago, the proportion by which people argue that government is dysfunctional is now bigger, #1 problem is now bigger than those who name the economy. So for a while it's been government dysfunction #1, economy #2, but now it's sort of in more recent polls. And it's only getting worse if we look at that poll data. Congress, not doing much in terms of actually passing laws, things that we expect Congress to do. And they're about to go into campaigning for a next presidential election. And so the midterms have just happened, they've come in and now in fact they're about to start campaigning again. People have been talking for a long time about voting. If you're a social studies teacher, this comes up all the time. Our voting rates hover around 60% in the presidential years and about 40% in midterms across all areas. So the presidential elections get people to the polls or not, and they vote locally and state as well. So first off, that's not all that high. I mean, we go all around the world and talk about we're in support of democracy, and then all these other countries are coming in at like 80 and 85 and 90%. So the numbers are not that high. But the hardest thing for those of us, for me, who work with young people, is that those numbers, low as they are disproportionately skewed toward older and whiter people, which means younger people and people of color are underrepresented in the pool of people who cast votes. So even though Benjamin Barber would say that's a thin democracy action, voting is just like this little thing, but young people's interests are underrepresented even in that small thing. And that is also only getting worse as more and more young people report being disengaged with institutional politics. NAEP, civic assessments in NAEP, talk about increasingly low levels of civic knowledge for kids. And it's not just that the numbers come down in terms of like how they answer questions, but they're particularly low on things like name 2 actions citizens can take to encourage Congress to pass a law. Only 1% of the young people taking that national assessment could do that. That's a very direct citizen engagement action. One would love to see a lot of young people being able to throw out ideas they could do to advocate for themselves. And as bad as that is, oh, and I should say, as bad as that is, a lot of the policy is about making it even harder for young people and people of color to vote in a lot of places. Young people in particular read a range of laws about registration that make it very hard for college students in a lot of states to be able to register to vote. And of course, more and more restrictions there. And then here, a lot of states are passing citizenship tests to guide the civics curriculum. Those citizenship tests are all about kind of the facts and figures in that first column, and not at all about civic engagement. And then something that actually, I think probably your next speakers could talk to, in recent polls, 25% of government social studies teachers reported nervousness about bringing politics into the classroom. Now that's not 25% of everyone. That's 25% of government teachers who arguably could say, this is my curriculum. So you can imagine if you teach phys ed or something like that, the nervousness people have about even entertaining this sort of thing in those many, many billions of hours of talk time in classrooms. So I worry a lot about stuff like this, because one could say, does this really matter? Governments come and go. And there's a lot of things we can do in our community that don't intersect with institutional politics, which we'll talk about in a second. But I really worry a lot about something like, an issue like global warming. Something that takes concerted action by a lot of people. Something that actually individuals can't easily remedy by themselves, where you'd want to intersect with institutional politics. Something like that is huge. Now here's some interesting Pew data, and this will be worse than all the other data I showed you by the time. So here's something we know. You take the statement, global warming is caused by human activity. 58% of Democrats will say yes. 27% of Republicans will say yes. Okay, so that's a partisan issue. We know that people are locked on that, and Democrats and Republicans are locked. We know that. But here's the part that depressed me. With a college degree, actually, you get 75% of Democrats saying they believe global warming is caused by human activity. So with a college degree, they more believe it. With a college degree, Republicans less believe it. So just to say, I remember, we found this in our work as a network, a college degree made these numbers skew more partisan. Not less partisan, because we would study the science, we would blah, 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 we would have free thinking, et cetera, and then we would, no, more partisan. Now, there are reasons people think that's the case, like, is our education giving us more tools to advance our own argument and decimate the others? Do we now know more what's wrong with the alternate position? And then we disregard it even more because we've had more education. There are theories about that. Who knows? I don't know if that's the truth, but that kept me up a very long night as an educator, wondering about that. So we know there's this increasing, people talk about disengagement of young people and these issues about institutional politics, but one of the things we're trying to do in our network is look a little bit in another space, change our view a bit. And what I'm going to report comes from a bunch of studies done by that group of faces that I showed you on the slide before, some action projects as well as a number of surveys. And we're going to look at some of these survey data. One thing, so we looked instead at participatory politics. In other words, the kinds of politics you do, peer-based, when you, for example, start a discussion group or like something on Facebook or open up a blog or go out into the community, make a video about something you care about and share it. Not voting, not necessarily institutional based, but something you do that's politically engaged. When we look at that, we see young people are really deeply engaged in politics. Now, these are the kinds of things I mean. For example, starting a change.org petition, filming and capturing the voices of people to tell their story and then sharing that on Facebook or somewhere else. Things like that, bringing together activists to do a meeting. So the same young people that are way underrepresented in voting are much taken and overrepresented in participatory politics, and that's one of the things we were looking at. So one piece of good news is for all of us as educators, this is an area of interest for young people, especially if you include something like this. Now, probably some of you know just what you're looking at here. So the three-finger salute is from, okay, and why is Harry Potter given it? I don't know, because that's a whole different book.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. Anybody know? Do you know the Harry Potter Alliance? Harry Potter Alliance is one of the case studies we did as researchers. Harry Potter Alliance is a group of young people who met as fans of Harry Potter and said, you know, Harry Potter is a lot about doing good, like Dumbledore's army. Let's become, in this world, Dumbledore's army. And they formed the Harry Potter Alliance. They started doing stuff, again, not institutional, but stuff like this, like investigating in the places where films were showing, Harry Potter films were showing. Were they serving chocolate? They started with chocolate, fair trade chocolate. And could they, the massive number of kids who were going to come see these movies, advocate for fair trade chocolate in these movie theaters? They actually made a bit of an impact. And then they thought that was kind of cool. They'll get together, they talk about the book, they play a bunch of games that are in the book that I can't name, but you know, you'll see them, you'll say, okay, they'll dress in costume, and then they do political stuff. So here comes Hunger Games, and Harry Potter Alliance kids say, here's another amazing thing. This tells us a lot about income inequality, and so maybe we can band together around this book. Fans and political fans, a kind of interesting melange. If you look at that, there are kids doing a lot of this. So making memes, sending them out, etc., with the three-finger salute. So if we put that on the map of politics, kids are not at all disengaged. They're actually pretty interested in this stuff. In fact, it makes complete sense. It aligns with what you normally do, right? When you're using social media and things like that. Builds on that. There's a way to be a young person and not have to be a different kind of fakey person to go talk to somebody or something. And also for all of us who work with K-12, it's something you can do before you're 18. So a lot of what goes on in schools, then it's like, oh, and when you vote, when you become a voter, when you're 18, when you're out of here, this will be important. But this is something you can do today about issues you care about. So as we've been doing surveys about this, we've only seen a growth in young people's doing of participatory politics. In these years, from our first doing the survey in 08 to 12, this is the growth of kids saying, these are things that I do. I post comments about things I care about on Facebook. I share news with other kids. And interestingly enough, in comparison with voting, it's more racially balanced. So when you look at voting statistics, again, they skew at all ages white. This is a more balanced demographic of kids who are doing political things. And in fact, by income level, although we're not surprised to see at the top range, income range, more access to devices and things like that, but the fact is we can use our phones and things like this to do this. So actually that's also pretty balanced. So in comparison with other kinds of political things, like getting to be an intern in City Hall or taking a special program where you're gonna do civic stuff, participating in participatory politics actually doesn't have those limits. More kids of more kind do it. And there aren't something like 4 slots for the school to send a kid to Model UN or something like that. So that's a kind of interesting thing. Last thing, people said to us when we were starting to look at this work, yeah, but what we don't want is a kind of clicktivism. We don't want kids to think that because they clicked like on Facebook, that's enough, and then they never go vote. Because actually, there's some things that everybody should be voting on because your interests are right there. But in our surveys, that's not the case. There's only 4% of the kids in our surveys who only did participatory politics and did not do institutional. Vast majority of them did both when they did them. The problem is that 34% who do neither. Neither do they vote or do institutional politics, nor do they do participatory politics. They're just disengaged with politics. Okay, so cool lady that I wanted to be, what I would have done at this point is talk to you about the basic skills of participatory politics. And we see these things when we did a number of studies of young activists and how they do politics, and they're doing this stuff. They're producing media. They're engaging in dialogue. They're mobilizing people. They're learning production value. They're sending media out. Stuff that other people talk to you about, it's hugely important. So I'm not going to talk about that. That would have been the great thing for me to talk about. I'm going to do something else because I'm still haunted by this. I'm still haunted by this more. Well, I'm haunted first off by that polar bear who's so cute on the ice floe because that makes me cry when I think about that. But I'm haunted by this possibility that more education makes you maybe more partisan on some of these key issues. So I want us to think back to those billions of hours, back to the dailiness, and wonder about not the times we do special projects, not the times we do a media thing or organize something in the community, but those many hours and their dailiness, and wonder if we can create a kind of new civic moment. If kids really are, through social media and other kinds of things, a little more interested now in politics in general, and if we have all these publicly paid employees and all these young people who are given the role in society to simply be in those buildings prior to work, could we in a daily way do more with them? So back to the dailiness, and then I want to tell you just a little lesson from Mongolia, and then I think that actually I have to quickly wrap up, right? 6:30? Okay. So in the 90s, I had the privilege, it was a great, wonderful thing to be part of a project that let me work over several years in Mongolia. Mongolia at that time was newly independent. So Mongolia had been for 70 years part of the Soviet Union. Fall of the Soviet Union, Mongolia becomes independent. And there was a project sponsored by the Soros Foundation for people to go to many of the countries of the former Soviet Union and share with them the kinds of methods we use in classrooms that are sort of democratic classroom methods. They had a very controlled Soviet school system. So here I am in Mongolia, literally out in the Gobi Desert, with herding families that send their kids to school with like 10 sheep, because you're gonna have to eat the sheep that all the families send with their kids, out in the vast expanse of the desert at this newly independent moment. I never saw so much daily civic engagement, talk, and thinking in my life than these incredible teachers, totally resource deprived, literally doing things like steaming the wrappers off of cans to use the white paper on the back when they had run out of paper. Didn't need anything except the time with kids, and this is what I saw. All the adults pretty much valued, and it's very Mongolian, open discussion about everything. They would have taken these prison papers and they would have spent a deep amount of time with young people about why and what they thought. What are the stories that led them to there? They would have chastised young people who would have said something like, I was just writing anything, by saying, but this is huge here in Mongolia. What will we do with our prisons? So that then there would be a kid like, oh my God, I wasted a chance to think. Routinely, consistently, they actualized their identity as a future political agent. Routinely, they said things like, now in independent Mongolia, you will need to figure out what to do about this. There's a huge problem with the cities and with the country. We'll all need to work together and you'll have to figure this out. So let's see if we can figure some of it out today in school. Routinely, they referenced this identity. And this is part of Mongolia, but not something like, one day you could be a programmer and you could make $1 billion. It was one day you could figure out how to do this in parliament or whatever. And they used constantly the pronouns we Mongolians, or you, your generation, will have to, or for us in Mongolia, all of us. They almost never talked about like the government or anyone else's they. So my notes are filled with that, and it was fascinating to me. We were brought there to be the representatives of democracy, and I was just thinking, I have a privilege to learn about democracy here that doesn't much happen this way at home. And part of course, that was they had a new country. So, Freire said it's easy to be a revolutionary teacher in a revolutionary time. They were in a revolutionary time, no surprise. And if I went back today, it may not be like that. But that kind of talk was not about the curriculum or about a project. It was a routine engagement among adults who expected that while they were together in school, they would be thinking like citizens for a country that collectively they were all part of. It was fascinating. So when we would come back in the USA, again, all of us would talk about how the conversation about college and career, back to that possessive individualism, what these standards will point you to college, which is a way of getting a career just later, or directly to a career, which is a career now. Are you getting the skills to succeed there in order to make an economic livelihood and contribute to production? This third C. In Oakland, as one of the action projects with YPP, we actually got the Oakland School District to add community to their graduate profile. That kids should be college ready, career ready, community ready. One tiny word, a third C. It was such a great thing because it's also a C. You could say the three things. This is what superintendents would need. They would need to be able to say, oh yes, the 3 Cs. That's what are they? Oh yes, right, college, career, community. It was huge. We didn't say citizenship because actually citizen is a challenging word, especially for us in Oakland. So we made it community because everyone's part of the community, documented, not documented, et cetera. This, as part of the graduate profile, changed a dramatic range of things because teachers then were able to argue for decisions as teachers that they would make that would point to community as well as college and career. Yes, we could have talked about the structure of the essays, but when I read so many, and when I thought and I heard how people were thinking about prisoners, and I know so much of this issue of incarceration is important for us in our community, I thought it was worth taking some time tomorrow to talk about it. So that's why I left the pacing guide. Oh, okay, you're helping them be community ready. So this was huge, and this is, I think, in his fuddy-duddy way, what Horace Mann, that's who he is, what Horace Mann might have thought when he advocated for a common school in America. That the common school movement would put all kinds of kids from all kinds of income levels and backgrounds together in one building commonly to reason toward a collective future. Okay, so last bit because we're almost out of time. I think that these hours that we have together are an opportunity in their dailiness for a kind of teacher research that I would highly advocate. This is just a comment from Jimmy Britton, an advocate of teacher research, about sort of how every lesson is an opportunity to learn something when you're a teacher. The big question in teacher research for me is always what if? What if? What happens when? What happens when? What happens when a group of teachers in Oakland? What happens when the 5th grade? What happens when social studies teachers try to do something? Plan, enact, reflect on the civic and democratic outcomes as well as the skill outcomes. What changes? What would we say are gaps between what I aspire to do, and then how do I fill those gaps? How can I share information with other teachers? What would happen if a lot of us on a daily basis just tried to find one little opportunity to raise the civic dimension of schooling with all those billions of hours and all those billions of dollars? That's what we're trying to do in Oakland. We're trying to say, what happens when 40 teachers in high schools try to enact this? They're doing some really interesting things. They're changing curriculum, they're adding action projects, but they're also just changing routine discussions in the cafeteria or ways that, things that happen in the do-nows at the beginning of the day. I'm sure that you've heard the do-nows, because we all have to have a do-now at the beginning of every lesson. So what's in your do-now? So it could be a little tiny thing, but they're all doing that. So what about if we thought about our teaching that way? So that's kind of a question I'd like to leave you with, and then show you really fast, because I know we're out of time, some slides that would suggest it would make a difference. Because I've left you with very depressing data. So I feel a need to actually do that so that you don't go directly to the bar and drink and then blame it on me. This lady said that global warming is hopeless because the more we learn, that keeps me up, but we'll switch to something. Has to do with creating a kind of culture. One of the things people talk about, democratic culture, that there's a kind of democratic culture that makes democracy work. And so I would say that that is one that values reasoning, not reasons. The 5-paragraph essay values reasons, and if you have 3 of them, or you could excel and get 4, and that might even be better, but they're reasons, it's not reasoning. I know that none of you saw any paper where any young person, because we found almost none in the whole set of thousands, where a young person connected their reasons to an argument like, well, prisoners as individuals should be able to control their own bodies, so why should we prevent them from a choice that people get to make outside of prison because I value that? Or, I am concerned about the possibility of coercion, and so for me, when people are in a captive situation, they need to be protected from coercion. No one talked about principles like that. They went through reasons, disease, this, that, or the other, but not like a theory of democratic life. Admittedly, that's a high bar, admittedly, but still, it did not show up. Okay, people talk about 2 kinds of reasoning. And people who are looking at like the data, like the Pew data, say that much of the time we spend time looking for evidence for what we already believe, directional reasoning. It's the way human species survives, confirming, confirming, confirming. We can sometimes shift reasoning to what some scholars, I don't like this term, but some scholars call an accuracy motivation. We create a culture where it's more important to be accurate or thoughtful or examine points of view. That's rewarded. People actually rise to that occasion if we create a culture and put people in it. So we did a quick online experiment. This is the last bit of data that we did with these surveys that we've been doing that you saw data from before. So at the time we did the survey, the income inequality argument was out. So it was like Occupy, et cetera. A lot of people were paying attention to it. So we created in the survey a little experiment. Here's how it went. We created, I should go back because this will, there we go, 3 types of posts. In these posts, kids of all different spectrum were going to take the survey and they were going to get a post and they were going to be asked questions. These are the kinds of posts. One was a post, okay, come back, there we go. One is a post that offered an opinion and then accurate data. Okay, so somebody made an opinion and then there's data, and that data is accurate. Okay. One is an opinion coupled with a cartoon. No data, but just a cartoon. They were all modeled, obviously, on circulatable Facebook posts, so you saw that, I'm sure, already. And then one is an inaccurate statement of data and a cartoon. Okay, so those kinds of posts. Then they're all distributed in different patterns through the survey, and there's close to 3,000 kids taking it. And there's another couple of questions that ask them some questions about their opinions that would help us decide whether they're liberal or conservative. Okay, here's what we found. We posted these questions after they saw them. do you think the post makes a good point? Do you think the comment's accurate? And would you retweet it? Would you send it on to others? Would you advocate? And then we were curious, what happened? Were the partisan viewpoints earlier in the survey at all related to what people said? Were they affected in any way by the type of post? So here's what we found out. Yes, your prior preference, policy preference earlier in the survey totally shaped what you said. Now, don't even worry about group C and F. The thing to know is if you were liberal, you agreed with the liberal positions, and much less if you were, we're gonna, on all those measures, send them on if they matched your preference, not if you were conservative, and the flip is on the other. So just know those numbers flip and they skew by partisanship. Okay, did you distinguish? Did they in any way distinguish between the fact, the opinion, the evidence ones? No. They same numbers, almost statistically indistinguishable whether there was data or not data. Okay, but what about the dailiness? So we asked them to talk about whether they had opportunities in school, to talk about things like evaluating data, listening to other opinions, discussion of political matters. There's a whole bunch of that, from which we coded more to less opportunity on a regular basis. And here's what we see in the data. The more time you have on this stuff in school, then that means you are less likely to rate the inaccurate as accurate. What you see in that green line, the fiction line, is about often at the side. If you got that often, you're statistically significantly less likely to say that post makes a good point. That's an accurate post. Ditto makes a good point. The green line comes down. And then lastly, interestingly, the more you have this information literacy kind of discussion, the less likely, no matter what the post is, young people were engaged in forwarding it. And in their comments, they often said, because I'm not sure yet. Not because I hate Facebook, but because I'm not sure. So that automatic, haha, that's funny, and send it on, but circulates that information much less. So in this whole survey, with a lot of different dimensions, the only things that raised themselves to statistical significance, it wasn't the particular curriculum, it wasn't the particular textbook, it wasn't access to a whole range of particular kinds of activities. It was the often measure. Often talk about this, often have open discussion, often listen to multiple points of view, often talk about the difference between accurate and inaccurate information. Happens a lot. That to me says what we do on those quotidian daily hours makes a difference. We don't have to necessarily be heroic. Some of us will be heroic teachers that put together an amazing thing that transforms the school. I think that's great to do. I'm actually pro. But a lot of us are going to go through, in many days of our lives, a fairly routine kind of teaching, in a fairly routine kind of school. But it can still make a difference if we bring that back. So I would only leave by saying, the last piece, what if? What if a lot of us just decided to say, yes, college, career, and community. Yes, there's a democratic purpose. I wonder today how I could act on it. Maybe I'll take some notes. Maybe I'll reflect on what I did. Maybe I'll find a buddy or a partner, and together we'll say, could we do a little more with this? How did it go for you? How did it go for me? What if a lot of us did that? Maybe we could make a dent. So that's what I want to leave you with, and I thank you for your patience because I've gone late. Thank you.
So I think we have time for maybe a question and a half. Because there's always time. It's like Jell-O, there's always room for it.
Actually, just real quick, is there a name for the project, the collaboration between the English teachers in Oakland or the social?
Yes, it's where I got the title for this. It's EDDA, Education for Democracy in a Digital Age. And quite specifically, EDA is what they'll call it locally. And people are both changing curriculum in their classes, it's mostly social studies and English. They're also introducing a civic capstone project and then trying to align curriculum to prepare kids for the civic capstone project in all the comprehensive high schools.
And I'll ask one question from the Twitter. So Nicole Mira, one of our former speakers, I'll just read her tweet, maybe you can respond. It's less a question than a tweet. That's how Twitter works. She says during the middle of her talk, she was pondering how to make teachers feel more comfortable discussing controversial issues in their class when you highlight how polarized adults are.
It is a great question, and I think that all of us who are, I would include who are outside the classroom as well. I think there's a role for administrators and for people like myself outside the classroom to keep arguing for our publics the democratic purpose of schools. And I actually have found, Oakland's easy, to do political curriculum in Oakland is actually probably one of the easier places to do it. But I think you'll see, when the Jefferson County folks come in, that, members of the community said, yeah, actually, we want this. We've talked, the YPP members have talked in a lot of different communities, and it's actually the bulk of families we keep encountering they're afraid of their young people being damaged by indoctrination. They're not afraid of examining community issues that matter. And there's a way that for them, it feels like a fine thing to be doing. So part of it is how we cast it, I think. But I think that we do have to actually erect some protections around teachers. And we have to also be alert, I would say, as teacher researchers, to the way that it sometimes goes awry. So I think, for example, this summer, the teaching the tensions, I'm imagining, there's a practice to this. We can get better at doing it as well. So I think we have to tend to those. But yeah, it's a great point that Nicole brings up.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Nicole.
And you need your papers back?
Oh yes, the student work, I need that.